I think the flow of people coming in has kind of calmed down. Do you think you want to get started, Greg?
Sounds good. Absolutely. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first in a series of webinars hosted by SRPEDD. We're glad you all could make it today. First, I'd like to quickly review some virtual meeting guidelines to ensure the best possible experience for all of our attendees and speakers. All participants, please remain muted and turn off your video until the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation if applicable. To participate in the Q&A portion of the webinar, please select the raised hand function. Find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom. The presenters will then call on participants. Feel free to type a question or comment into the chat window, and we will address as many of those questions as we can during the Q&A. If you're on the phone, you can use *6 to toggle mute and *9 to raise your hand. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the Moving Forward 2045 webpage. Before we dive into today's topics, I'd like to introduce myself, my co-presenters, and the agency I work for. I'm Gregory Guertin, Senior Transportation Planner for SRPEDD, and today I'll be joined by Phillip Duarte, Chairman of the Taunton Pathways Committee, and Jeffrey Carvahlo, Chairman of the Dighton Trails Committee. We are the Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District. Our agency serves a regional community of 27 cities and towns in southeastern Massachusetts. Our work is place-based and community-focused, meaning that we work to formulate and implement plans that will achieve real quality of life improvements on the ground, and to ensure that these plans reflect the express needs of civically engaged local communities. Our agency consists of 4 departments: comprehensive planning, which also consists of housing and environment, economic development, homeland security, and transportation. And while SRPEDD may consist of departments, we function as a team. Our planners bring a diversity of professional backgrounds and areas of expertise to our work, and SRPEDD emphasizes partnerships with each community we serve, with the state and federal government, with nonprofits and community groups, and with citizens across southeastern Massachusetts. Our work includes community master plans, regional transportation planning, habitat restoration, watershed protection, fiscal impact scenarios, transit planning, drone surveys, 3D interior photography, economic development, and believe it or not, even more. Now that you know who we are, let's dive into what brings us here today. Every 4 years, our transportation department develops a regional transportation plan, an RTP. The RTP is a blueprint of our existing and future transportation system. It looks at every facet of transportation, including roads, bridges, travel patterns, public transportation, freight, airports, as well as bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. It assesses our transportation needs and identifies the necessary improvements to enhance our transportation system. With this webinar series, we aim to shed some light on these topics by bringing together local perspectives and proven concepts from our own backyard and around the world. This webinar series is about asking ourselves important questions that can help guide our thinking as an agency and as a region moving forward. There are many problems with the state of infrastructure in the United States. Our region is no exception. There are, however, 2 forms of transportation that we will discuss today that can help us remedy a variety of those issues. These forms of transportation will reduce our carbon footprint, lower rates of heart disease and obesity, help us grow local economies, and even dramatically decrease congestion on our roadways. And unlike the very useful but costly automobile, one of these forms of transportation is free, and the other can cost as little as $100 annually to operate and maintain. We're here to talk about walking and biking. Now, as an agency, we aren't in the business of telling you how you should get around, but we are in the business of making sure that no matter how you need or choose to get around, as a resident of, worker, or visitor in southeastern Massachusetts, that you can do so safely and freely under the purview of the law. Since we know that bicycling and walking are 2 of the most affordable, healthiest, and accessible forms of transportation, we want to ensure that we give everyone in the region equal opportunity to make use of these easy and enjoyable forms of transportation. Which leads us to the question we have set out to answer during this presentation. How can bike and pedestrian infrastructure build economy, improve safety, and support our communities? And furthermore, How can we work together to develop our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure as individual communities and as a region? So how does bike and pedestrian infrastructure build economy, improve safety, and support our communities? To answer this question, we're going to highlight some problem areas for our transportation system as a whole and discuss how bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure can address each of them. I also want to take a moment to discuss complete streets and to provide an overview of the many essential bicycle and pedestrian design elements. From there, our guest speakers will tell you more about how their communities are working to make Dighton and Taunton more bikeable and walkable communities. At the end of the webinar, our presenters and additional SRPEDD staff will be made available for Q&A. So please be sure to write down any questions you have as we move through the presentation. So what problems do bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure address? The problems that I'm going to discuss today revolve around safety, congestion and environment, public health, the economy, social and community problems, and accessibility. Let's start by talking about safety. Now, I'm a strong believer that the built environment has a huge influence on how we behave, especially when we're getting from point A to point B. Wide lanes, infrequent stops, little to no visual obstruction. These are some of the many reasons why highways are so efficient at moving drivers of automobiles so quickly to their destinations. These are also the reasons why they're strictly for the use of automobiles. If you head off to school on foot or take your bicycle to get to work and choose to take 195, I would argue that there is a very high chance, around 90 to 100%, if you were to be struck, that you'd be killed by someone driving an automobile. And to be fair, and to point out the obvious, by no means should you have tried to get to work or school on foot or by bike using 195. It was not built for that purpose. The unfortunate reality is that many streets that we use to navigate through our communities were retrofitted or specifically designed to look and act much like interstate highways in terms of attempting to move vehicles quickly and efficiently. Wide lanes, multiple lanes, speeds high enough to nearly ensure a fatality if an automobile were to come into contact with anyone outside of an automobile are all common attributes of our regional road network. So let's take a look at some data to better understand the safety issues we face as a region. From 2014 to 2016, there were 335 crashes reported involving a motor vehicle and a bicycle, resulting in 257 injuries and 4 deaths. Many of these crashes were concentrated along specific corridors in the region that we have highlighted it in our last RTP and regional bicycle plan. Similarly, from 2013 to 2015, there were 814 vehicle crashes involving pedestrians, of which 646 resulted in injuries and 22 were fatal. There is an 80% chance of death when a pedestrian is struck by an automobile moving at just 44 miles per hour. I think I can say with confidence that we all know that many, if not most people, hover at or go over the speed limit at any given time. So when speed limit signs are treated like recommendations and enforcement isn't enough, something physical has to come between different road users. Something else besides a posted speed limit or any other signage has to cause or force drivers to slow, stop, or yield for people walking or biking. Numerous studies have shown that bicycle facilities, particularly protected and separated bike facilities, were strongly associated with better road safety outcomes for all users. It should be noted that Sharrows, share the road signage and markings, had no notable effect on safety for any group of road users. Bike and pedestrian infrastructure serves to separate different road users from one another as frequently as possible, which aids in eliminating opportunities for collision with automobiles and narrows roads, which shortens crossing distances for pedestrians across roadways and reduces the speed of cars. An increase in protected and separated bicycle facilities seem to show a direct decrease in serious injuries and fatalities of all road users. The results of these studies are unsurprising, as even the US DOT data shows that speeding plays a role in more than 30% of fatal crashes in the US. So it serves to reason that any and all efforts to slow automobiles down on our roadways would result in reduced road fatalities. In fact, another study estimated that eliminating speeding would reduce road fatalities by 25 to 30%. Now, I think we can all picture a time where we were sitting in traffic wondering where it starts. why it's happening, and what did I do to deserve this? Simply put, in that moment, we are the very traffic we're complaining about. I'm sure most of us have also been stuck in traffic and can remember a time a person on a bicycle gracefully zips on through the clogged roadway with ease, even when there aren't any bike lanes. Well, imagine if there was a bike lane on that road that you travel on so often that is always clogged up whenever you need to get from point A to point B. Now you've got a proper alternative to wasting precious time and money sitting in traffic. Pedestrians and people riding bicycles take up far less space on the roadway than automobiles. Sidewalks and bikeways can move many more people in far less space than auto lanes can. Another byproduct of getting more folks walking and biking is the need for less parking in our communities. Less cars means less parking requirements. When walking and biking are paired with appropriate public transit, it can significantly reduce the most routine and mundane instances of congestion that we experience. But congestion isn't merely an inconvenience. It's detrimental to our financial well-being, quality of life, and it's a significant negative impact on air quality. After all, more time spent idling in traffic means more time that your engine is running, more fossil fuels that are burning, and your car is blowing it all out of its tailpipe and into the air that we breathe. Even when not congested, roadways in America and the SRPEDD region are a significant cause of CO2 pollution. The most recent Massachusetts greenhouse gas inventory showed that 30% of CO2 emissions in Massachusetts came from transportation. Promoting walking and bicycling in the region must be at the core of every strategy implemented to reduce those emissions. By reducing vehicle miles traveled, we can lower overall greenhouse gas emissions, helping mitigate the effect our region has on climate change and local air quality. The public health effects of a car-dependent society are diverse and well documented. Deaths and injury due to car crashes, depression and anxiety from long and isolated commutes and severed communities, higher rates of obesity and cardiovascular disease from physical inactivity, lung cancers and pediatric asthma from pollution, sleep disturbance, hypertension, and raised blood pressure in children from noise at road intersections. The list goes on. These are all public health risks of excessive automobile use and dependence. Recent advancements in autonomous tech and the electrification of automobiles will help to curb some of those public health and congestion issues in our region, but their costs can be prohibitive. The easier, low-cost intervention for all of these public health maladies is bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. By getting more cars off of the road and further separating them from other modes of transport, we decrease the likelihood of crashes with and between automobiles. We decrease the amount of time spent inactive throughout our already quite inactive lifestyles. And we decrease the amount of pollution emitted from tailpipes, thus lowering rates of pulmonary diseases while lowering transportation's contribution to overall greenhouse gas emissions. And on the other side of the coin, by getting more people on bicycles and walking through their communities, we increase levels of physical activity, of which the positive side effects are boundless. Better sleep, better heart health, better mental health, lower rates of obesity, and so on. Now, all forms of transportation interact with and influence the economy at all levels, local, regional, state, and nationally. Automobiles and other forms of motorized transport have a good number of costs that come hand in hand with the conveniences they offer. Injury, death, pollution, lost time, lost productivity, and physical inactivity caused by our use of automobiles all impact our economy greatly. That cost to the public is approximately $35.7 billion annually. Those are the costs that Massachusetts residents incur, whether or not they even drive. Those residents that don't drive or don't have access to a vehicle are predominantly lower income and benefit far less from the vehicle economy. Another $28.4 billion annually is paid out by consumers to own and operate their private vehicles. Those of us who own and drive cars know all too well the variety of costs that our vehicles incur on us throughout the year. Now let's take a closer look at the economic benefits of active transportation, some of which I've already highlighted on my previous slides. Biking and walking increase our transportation system's overall efficiency by reducing some of the negative effects of auto travel like congestion, the need for on-street parking and parking garages, and accident damages. When combined with public transit access, walking and biking facilities improve access to education and employment opportunities, especially for those of us who do not or cannot drive. A healthy workforce is a productive workforce. There is a direct link between increased labor productivity and increased worker fitness. The infrastructure that supports walking and biking is a more compact form of land use, resulting in lower installation and maintenance costs. For comparison, it costs roughly between $17,000 and $45,000 a mile to convert a traffic lane to a two-way bike lane, whereas resurfacing one lane of heavily traveled street costs roughly $600,000, and expanding a street by one lane costs roughly $3 million per mile. Bicycling, much like the automobile, also has an entire industry built around it. The sale of bicycles, accessories, and services to maintain them all benefit from more folks getting out on their bicycles. Additionally, those costs to the consumer are far less than that of a car. According to AAA, the annual cost to own a new car ranges anywhere from $7,000 to $11,000, whereas owning and operating a bicycle can range anywhere from $100 to $400 annually. That difference is quite staggering. Oh, and walking costs as much as your favorite pair of shoes. And all of that is to say that there are tremendous economic benefits to both individuals and the Commonwealth by incorporating bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure into our local, regional, and state transportation system. When the interstate highway was constructed, for all its purpose and utility, it also severed countless tight-knit communities into many disjointed parts. This is especially true, as I mentioned earlier, for those who are not able to own or drive a car. By having built much of our road infrastructure around and similar to our highway system, we have been continuing that trend of disconnection and severing ties over and over again at every scale. By building better bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, we can begin to repair those severed ties and bring communities closer together. This is true both in terms of reconnecting communities to one another and also better connecting residents of a community to their own neighborhoods and their community at large. You don't just happen upon a friend while going about your daily commute by car. And even if you do, a passing glance or the sound of a car horn is all you have time for. By bicycling or walking, it takes but a second to stop your bicycle and pull over for a quick catch-up. Or you can pop into every shop along your ride. You can do so without worrying about finding parking or moving your vehicle multiple times. The automobile has its place in daily travels, and especially for anything of considerable distance. Being able to use the highway and main roads to get to places or see people that aren't so close to home within a relatively short amount of time is both convenient and essential at times. But the opportunities for connection and social cohesion that bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure present are worth emphasizing and are unmatched by that of cars and the facilities that support them. The efficiency or effectiveness of our transportation system should not be measured in terms of level of service, but by how well it serves its most disadvantaged and underserved community members. It must be the goal of transportation practitioners and community leaders to provide access to affordable and reliable transportation to fairly meet the needs of all community members, but particularly traditionally underserved populations. That means building better bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and doing it where it's needed the most. Traditionally underserved populations have a greater need for safe facilities for walking and biking than most. Now, here is a sampling of research findings from the Federal Highway Administration that support that statement. The reality of our transportation system is that the very people who most need alternatives to the automobile are those that are less likely to live near or travel along roads with safe and accessible, high quality bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. That means the people who are the most underserved or at risk in our communities are the ones who are walking or riding bicycles along roadways with higher traffic speeds, volumes, and pollution. When you don't have anywhere safe to walk or ride that is properly separated from traffic, you are at much higher risk of being struck and killed by an automobile. A street that does not allow for safe and accessible transportation for all users is failing and is incomplete. And that begs the question, what is a complete street? And as it turns out, there's a whole movement in transportation planning and community advocacy around the idea of complete streets. It's a movement that brings together policy and people, networks and neighborhoods, designs and destinations. The complete streets concept reclaims streets for people, re-examines the public realm, and challenges some commonly held perceptions about transportation. A complete street is a street that is safe and accessible for all users, pedestrians, bicycles, transit users, and motor vehicles. Complete streets accommodate people of all ages and physical abilities. There is no single formula or prescription for the complete street. It is complete because it speaks to the context of the surrounding area. It's a statement of that place. Complete streets is far more than just a concept. Federal and state DOTs have taken notice and have acted to provide funding for communities to take on complete streets projects. Cities and towns within Massachusetts can participate in the Massachusetts DOT Complete Streets Funding Program to make complete streets a part of daily practice in their communities. Our agency assists municipalities within Southeastern Massachusetts with the development and adoption of complete streets policies that directs all town departments to consider complete streets design elements in all projects and phases going forward. With technical assistance funding from Mass DOT Complete Streets Funding Program, SRPEDD helps municipalities develop a complete streets prioritization plan that will ultimately be used to apply for funding from Mass DOT to begin the construction of projects on that plan. So, what does bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure look like, and who is it for? Now that we know why bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is important, let's take a look at the best examples of specific street treatments that can be implemented in our communities to complete our streets. The following examples come from a variety of design guides and sources, but primarily from SRPEDD's Regional Bike Plan and Regional Pedestrian Plan, and the National Association of City Transportation Officials design guides. But before discussing the specific bicycle infrastructure or bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, it's important to understand the characteristics and comfort level of cyclists. A key concept in the development of bicycle facilities is the design cyclist. Similar to a design vehicle, the concept of the design cyclist allows bicycle facilities to be planned for users of varying degrees of skill and cycling ability. 3 groups have been defined and used in bicycle planning when discussing design cyclists. Another important consideration for bicycle safety is the comfort zone, or the width needed to adequately accommodate cyclists, plus the width to operate and or maneuver a bicycle. Now let's get into those bicycle facilities. Sharrows are road markings used to tell street users that the lane is for both cars and bicycles. These markings are not a substitute for bike lanes. They do not provide any additional safety to anyone riding their bicycle on that road. However, the primary benefit of these markings is to reinforce the legitimacy of bicycle traffic on the street. These markings should only be used on roads that are too narrow to include a true bicycle lane. Bike lanes are defined as a portion of the roadway that has been designated by striping, signage, and pavement markings to be primarily or exclusively used by bicyclists. Bike lanes enable bicyclists to ride at their preferred speed without worrying about traffic conditions and facilitate predictable behavior and movements between bicyclists and motorists. A bike lane is different than a cycle track in that it has no physical barrier blocking it from automobiles. Bike lanes usually go with traffic, although they can be designed to go against traffic or in both directions on the same side of the road when necessary for the connectivity of a particular bicycle route. Buffered bike lanes are conventional bike lanes that have a buffer separating the bicycle lane from the adjacent motor vehicle travel lane or parking lane. Buffered bike lanes provide greater distance between motor vehicles and bicyclists to pass each other safely than non-buffered bike lanes. A cycle track is an exclusive bike facility that combines the user experience of a separated path with the on-street infrastructure of a conventional bike lane. A cycle track is physically separated from motor traffic and distinct from the sidewalk. Cycle tracks have different forms, but all share common elements. They provide space that is intended to be exclusively or primarily used for bicycles and are separated from motor vehicle travel lanes, parking lanes, and sidewalks. Cycle tracks are more attractive for bicyclists of all levels and ages. Bicycle boulevards are streets with low motorized traffic volumes and speeds, designated and designed to give bicycle travel priority. Bicycle boulevards use signs, pavement markings, and speed and volume management measures to discourage through trips by motor vehicles and create safe, convenient bicycle crossings of busy arterial streets. Bikeway signing and marking encompasses any treatment or piece of infrastructure whose primary purpose is either to indicate the presence of a bicycle facility or to distinguish the facility for bicyclists, motorists, and pedestrians. Some bicycle-specific signage exists to provide motorized traffic with information and instruction. Bikeway markings represent any device applied onto the pavement surface and intended to designate a specific right-of-way direction, potential conflict area, or route option. Bicycle signals and beacons facilitate bicyclist crossings of roadways. Bicycle signals make crossing intersections safer for bicyclists by clarifying when to enter an intersection and by restricting conflicting vehicle movements. The definition of a sidewalk is a paved path for pedestrians at the side of the road. While this definition is technically accurate, it does not capture the full essence of the entity. A sidewalk's main purpose is to provide safe travel for a pedestrian, but it also can be a social space or an attraction for business. For example, a sidewalk with enough room to accommodate seating for a street-side cafe. When designing or improving a sidewalk, it's important not only to take into account the safety of pedestrians, the nature of the roadway area, and potential for economic development should also be considered. Crosswalks should be designed to offer as much comfort and protection to pedestrians as possible. Historically, many crosswalks were designed using inadequate narrow striping, setbacks, deviations from the pedestrian walkway, and considerable crossing distances. Crosswalks are defined as specially paved or marked paths for pedestrians crossing a street and typically fall into two categories: intersection crosswalks and mid-block crosswalks. While intersection crossings are typically preferred, there are some situations where a mid-block crossing is necessary. For example, places where there is a long distance between intersections or there are a high volume of pedestrians crossing that road. Speed tables are mid-block traffic calming devices that raise the entire wheelbase of a vehicle to reduce its traffic speed. Where applied, speed tables may be designed as raised mid-block crossings, often in conjunction with curb extensions. Curb ramps are solid ramps providing transition between the sidewalk and street level and can either face the direction of travel through the crosswalk or be placed at an angle to provide access to two perpendicular crosswalks. Curb ramps should always meet Americans with Disability Act design guidance and should have a tactile warning panel. Tactile warning panels are rectangular panels with raised bumps that alert pedestrians with low vision or blindness to the presence and direction of a roadway crossing. Curb extensions, also called bump outs or bulb outs, are a physical extension of the sidewalk into the roadway to narrow the roadway and provide additional pedestrian space at key locations. Curb extensions enhance pedestrian safety by increasing pedestrian visibility, shortening crossing distances, slowing turning vehicles by tightening the turn radius, and visually narrowing the roadway. Generally, the further the bulb out extends into the roadway and the tighter the turn radius created by the bulb out, the greater the benefits. Median refuge islands, sometimes referred to as pedestrian safety areas, are a raised or marked area between two opposing directions of travel that allow pedestrians to cross one direction of traffic at a time. This significantly reduces the complexity of the crossing. Providing raised medians or pedestrian refuge areas at pedestrian crossings at marked crosswalks has demonstrated a 46% reduction in pedestrian crashes. Equally important to the allocation of space in the form of street cross sections and geometry is the allocation of time performed by traffic signals. Space and time in combination govern how streets operate and how well they provide mobility, safety, and public space. Signal timing is an essential tool, not just for the movement of traffic, but also for a safer environment that supports walking, bicycling, public transportation, and economic vitality. For additional funding for your projects your community might be pursuing, we would strongly encourage you to pursue these funding sources. If you'd like any more information about one or all of these, please feel free to reach out to us. Now, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Phillip Duarte, Chairman of the Taunton Pathways Committee.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you to SRPEDD for hosting this very important webinar series on moving together and looking at transportation planning in a way that encompasses all those different issue areas that you discussed. Just as a bit of an introduction, my name is Phillip Duarte. I'm the chair of the Taunton Pathways Committee. I also serve on the Taunton City Council, and in my day job, I work up at the State House for State Representative Carol Duarte, who is here. Thank you, Rep. Duarte, for joining us and for being a supporter of these issues, both locally and at the state level. I just also want to recognize Jonathan Gray, who's the vice chair of our committee, and Karen Latender, a member of our committee, who are joining us. So you can go to the next slide, Greg. So the mission of the Taunton Pathways Committee, which we worked on and have tweaked over the years, is to create a coalition of city, state, and federal government officials, local business owners, and nonprofit groups to improve access to multimodal transportation for all Taunton residents and visitors and safely connect them to the recreational opportunities in Taunton and our surrounding communities, with a goal of creating those opportunities that help to promote a healthier and safer community for citizens of all ages and abilities. And so I think there's several keywords in there that we already heard in Greg's presentation about how transportation ties into these different issues. And I just thought it was important to start with those two things because both are focused on how we need to address these issues collaboratively and think about transportation work as a way to build a healthier lifestyle, spur economic development, and ultimately support our communities. Next slide. So just some background info on how the Taunton Pathways Committee started. So I think it was in summer of 2016. I had taken up biking as a hobby, was going out on various trails like the East Bay Bike Path, the Cape Cod Rail Trail, and thought, why can't we have a lovely recreational amenity like these trails in Taunton? And at the time I was interning at the State House, I had spoken to State Representative Pat Haddad, who represents Dighton and Somerset. And she put me in touch with Bill Napolitano, my favorite SRPEDD staffer, who is pictured here receiving an award from the EPA at Faneuil Hall. Bill has been involved with the Taunton River Trail since its inception in 1994. And so that picture on the right is the original plan design study for the Taunton River Trail from 1994 from the Conway School of Design. And so over the course of a few months after that, we discussed how we could restart and revamp the process for the Taunton River Trail in the region. So the Taunton River Trail since 1994 has been worked on periodically over the years on different sections, most notably around the 2010 time period when there was an established Taunton River Trail Committee. That committee had members from each of the communities, from the different state and federal entities, National Park Service, DCR, Mass DOT, but Taunton was always a bit of a snag in the planning because of the location of the Taunton Municipal Lighting Plant in relation to the trail. So at the time, the city of Taunton had just created its open space and recreation plan in 2015, and with the help of SRPEDD, and they made sure to include in that plan a specific goal to develop a citywide multi-use trail system to include walking, hiking, biking, and water access features. And one of those sub-goals specifically was the Taunton River Trail. Next slide. So after those few months, our committee was officially appointed by former mayor of Taunton, Tom Hoy, in January of 2017. I would like to think that we hit the ground running and immediately began looking at how to restart the Taunton River Trail, specifically the Taunton portion, which, as I said, did not have much action previously. So when we started our committee, the first thing that we recognized as being important was trying to create a name for ourselves and do a bit of branding so people knew who we were, what we were trying to do. I think that speaks to what Greg had talked about with creating social connections and how this type of planning can facilitate that. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned while doing this work is the importance of coalition building and working across different levels of government, different types of entities. And so the two that I have listed here are SRPEDD, as well as Mass in Motion, which is a program through the state's Department of Public Health that aims to promote healthy eating and active living in our communities where people live, learn, work, and play. And so the city of Taunton has an active Mass in Motion branch. And so we've worked with them very closely to help facilitate the active living portion of their program and policy work. So in the work around coalition building, we met with many of our elected officials, both at the local and state level, department heads in our city government, our DPW, Parks and Rec, economic development, as well as other stakeholders in the community in our community and other communities that have worked on this in the past. In addition to that, we did a lot of community outreach so that we could create that name for ourselves. We had meet and greets, we did bike rides, bike rodeos, and did informational tabling at a lot of different events in the community and surrounding communities. And I say it in past tense because that was all pre-pandemic. So in addition to that, as time went on, we expanded the scope of our committee to be more than just working on the Taunton River Trail specifically. So working with Mass in Motion, we performed a lot of walk audits that were then put into a walking brochure to identify some good salient walking routes in our community, particularly for our seniors. We also completed a bike and pedestrian survey that gave us a lot of good information about what people are looking for. And then we we did things like submitting comments on state legislation relative to active transportation, submitting comments on proposed road work from Mass DOT that had an effect on these types of issues. And we also, myself and several members of my committee were very actively involved in the creation of the Taunton Tomorrow Comprehensive Master Plan. And I'd like to think, thanks to our input, it has a very good transportation and open space chapter. And then the last thing I'll just point out is that we did attend several conferences, Mass DOT's Moving Together Conference and the Mass Trails Conference through DCR. And then the last thing for this slide, we eventually created a nonprofit 501c3, Friends of the Taunton Pathways, to assist us in our work so that we would be able to raise money and get sponsorships from different organizations. So that organization has been used to facilitate and raise money for a lot of these different activities, as well as being created in the long term to help facilitate with maintenance of the trail when it is eventually built. And we've also been doing work to install bike racks across the city using the funds from that organization. Next slide. So on the Taunton River Trail specifically, so the Taunton River Trail is a proposed 22 plus mile network of on-road and off-road trails and infrastructure that will connect the communities of Taunton, Dighton, and Somerset, shown here. Once complete, the Taunton River Trail will connect to the South Coast Bikeway at its southern terminus in Somerset at the Veterans Memorial Bridge. The South Coast Bikeway will connect Rhode Island to Cape Cod. And then to the north, our connections are potentially to the proposed Norton Rail Trail, which is currently on the tip, which will then connect to the existing World War II Veterans Memorial Trail in Mansfield. And so the trail in Taunton begins in the Ware, but there's a lot of on-road connections that can get us to Norton in different ways, particularly by connecting to our industrial park, which would spur people, hopefully, to use that transportation if they work in the industrial park and live in the city. And I just want to encourage everyone. At the end, I have our website on the last slide. And so these maps are interactive Google Maps that are on our website. And our Vice Chair, John Gray, did a phenomenal job of putting these together. So all these little markers are things that you can click on, parks, water access, different connections that all have some purpose. So I encourage you to explore that. Next slide. So Taunton's portion of the Taunton River Trail. So what we are working on right now, I like to refer to as the skeleton, because as you saw in the previous slide on the picture on the left, there's a lot of different connections that we would like to make. But right now we are focusing on this 2-mile portion from the Ware Village Riverfront Park at the top of that photo down to Railroad Ave to get us as close to Dighton as possible. So beginning in 2018, the Taunton Pathways Committee began engaging with the Gateway City Parks Program, which is a program of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs at the state level. And so they provide funding for parks and other recreational amenities to the Commonwealth's 26 gateway cities. And I think it's important to note that, as Greg also pointed out about equity, This was a program that was created with the intention to promote equity in transportation and recreation in our gateway cities, which are traditionally disinvested in. And so, you know, a lot of small towns, wealthier communities have the discretionary funds available to do these improvements and create this infrastructure, but a lot of our gateway cities don't. So we've been working with them since 2018 on this 2-mile section of the trail. I would note towards the bottom, in between the smiley face and the 2 blue squares, is our Taunton Municipal Lighting Plant, which, as I pointed out at the beginning, has been the challenge. As you can see there, at that point, the trail has to come off the railroad and make a loop around the plant. And so that's something that we've been working with them very closely to address. The smiley face on the diagram is the location of the Walker Blake graveyard, which I always consider a significant thing to point out because it's a historical asset to our community. It is one of the oldest graveyards in the city and in the country. And it also is not accessible currently to the public. So it contains the oldest gravestone in Taunton, but if you want to access it, you have to get the permission of the TMLP and be escorted by them. So this trail would create public access to that graveyard. Next slide. So as I said, the trail begins at the Ware Village Riverfront Park. Some of you may have been there and seen it. So this was the former FB Rogers site in the Ware. The Ware, if you don't know, is a very industrial area of the city of Taunton that had and still has a lot of blighted old factories. And so FB Rogers was an old factory that was torn down and turned into this linear park. And that was at the cost of 3.7 million. It was a local, state, federal partnership, which I pointed out is important. And so there was local money invested, state money in the form of 2 park grants, money from DEP and Mass Development, as well as federal money from HUD and EPA. And so this was really the beginning of the revitalization of the Ware section of the city. And so this park serves as the trailhead for the Taunton River Trail. So when we start construction of the trail, it will connect to this park. And then just to the point of economic development, the right top 2 photos are of the River House restaurant, which just opened last year, I think during the pandemic. And so that building was vacant for so many years. But once the city took action to clean up this area and build this park, it directly resulted in this property owner and business owner finally making use of that property and creating this restaurant. And so I would encourage you to check it out. And one thing I like to tell people is when this section of the trail is complete, you'll be able to get dinner at the River House, ride your bike, work off the dinner to Freights, have some ice cream, and then ride back and work off the ice cream. Next slide. So the design and engineering of this section of the trail, what we refer to as phase 1, which is from the park up until number 6, if you can see it, which is Cleary Flood Drive leading into the TMLP. So that design and engineering was completed last summer by our friends at Brown, Richardson and Rowe and Stantec. James Pfeiffer, our lead landscape architect, is on the webinar, so I would like to give him a shout out. So he created these boards for us to use in these types of presentations. And so this one and the next one just show the existing conditions on the left and then what the trail will look like based on imagery of other trails. So we start with the on-road conditions connecting to the park and leading up to the railroad corridor. And so that will turn into basically a separated path along the street. Then we have the conditions on the railroad corridor. So that's pretty straightforward. Like they did in Fall River with the Quickwichan, we're going to try to restore and reuse some of the rail for historical exhibits. And then there are some areas where there are adjacent residences that, we're working with those neighbors to accommodate. Next slide. There's a nice point in the trail along the railroad bed at number 4, where it's right up against the river. And so we're going to have a nice seating area overlooking the river right there. And then, as I said, it will turn off of the railroad bed to go around the TMLP. And so for phase 1, it will stop at the TMLP's access road, Cleary Flood Drive. Next slide. And so this is just a depiction of some of the landscaped and furnished areas on the trail. So we have a few different seating areas, one where the trail turns onto the railroad bed, one at that location where it's right up against the river, and then the trail entry at Cleary Flood Drive. Next slide. And then these are just the typical cross sections for the different sections of the trail. So we have the on-street section and then on the railroad corridor and through the woods. Next slide. And then this last slide on this section is just about the wayfinding and signage that we'll use on the trail. So these photos are from different trails that the Gateway City Parks program has done. I think the most notable in this region is the Quickwichan. So it will look very similar to what you see on that trail. And so there will be directional signs, mile markers, and then different signs that point out historical, natural, and cultural amenities. Next slide. And then the phase 2 is just the section that continues from the TMLP's access road and loops around back to the railroad bed to get us to Railroad Ave. And so those two blue squares are where the TMLP has proposed to build a solar array. And so that's why we are working on this in partnership with them to try to get that solar array built with the trail and do it in one fellow sweep. Next slide. I just wanted to point out some of the other recreational work that includes pathways going on in the city. So right now, actually, a Memorial Park is under construction for what they are calling phase 1 of the work that's going to be done at that park, which includes resurfacing the pathway at the front of the park. Our Office of Economic and Community Development under the leadership of Bill Roth, who is also on the webinar. Thank you, Bill. He is looking at addressing the Walker Park, which is on the other side of the River House restaurant. And so that park would connect basically the two sides of the river and make a nice loop because there is a park on each side of the river. The state through DCR has done significant amounts of work at Massasoit State Park in the past few years, and that is a very vital recreational amenity for walking and off-road biking in our community. And then a lesser known amenity is the Westville Conservation Area, which has some walking trails, which is on North Walker Street, you know, in a wooded area. And then lastly, I'll just point out that once again, in partnership with SRPEDD, the city of Taunton will be updating its open space and recreational plan. So that plan was 2015 to 2022. So it is set to expire. And so we will be working with SRPEDD on updating it. And that plan is obviously critical because of the funding resources that it unlocks to do a lot of this work. Next slide. And then on road work, so the photo here is the one lone complete street that we have in Taunton, Kilmer Ave. So we got complete streets funding for Kilmer Ave in 2017, one of the first complete streets rounds. So this street connects housing authority property with a school, as well as our bus station. And so that was the first project that we applied for. Other road work happening in the city that will include pedestrian and bicycle facilities. I'm sure SRPEDD is very familiar with the Broadway Route 138 project that Mass DOT is undertaking in 2 phases. So going back to the point about making a name for ourselves, I think we did a good job because most recently when doing the design for phase 2, you know, they approached us about how we felt about their design. So I think that speaks to the work that we've done to build ourselves up as advocates in this sector. Bay Street and Ware Street are undergoing resurfacing, or Bay Street has been resurfaced, but in both streets they are working on the sidewalk infrastructure. Ware Street is a vital connection between our downtown and the Ware, and so they'll be reconstructing the sidewalks there. And that street is on our complete streets prioritization plan, but that funding is coming down through housing choices. The Dorito is the wasted space, I like to call it, in the Taunton Green. And so in partnership with the Office of Economic and Community Development and the DPW and the Mayor's Office, we've been looking at how to reclaim some of that space from the Taunton Green to create an outdoor seating area to promote economic development in our downtown, as well as slow everyone down and promote walkability. And so that's kind of the first bite at the apple of the long-term goal of addressing the traffic circulation in the Taunton Green and trying to change it to a more bike and pedestrian friendly atmosphere, which is obviously important to making our downtown more walkable and bikeable. And then the last point I have is just about complete streets. The city of Taunton, to my knowledge, has not applied for complete streets in the most recent rounds of funding, but we have a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of streets, such as the one pictured here that are wide enough to land a plane on, that, you know, can easily be reworked, you know, if we go for these complete streets funding opportunities. So that's something that I hope as chair of this committee and as a city councilor, we can work with our DPW on going forward. Next slide. And then our future plans. So the phase 2 is the obvious one to finish off that 2-mile section of the Taunton River Trail. The long-term plan is to connect to Dighton on the railroad bed. There's several obstacles to that, so it may have to be an on-road connection with the help of our friends at Mass DOT for right now, but eventually we do want to connect on the railroad bed going over the 3 Mile River. And then there is also a railroad spur off of that section that connects to Boyd and Wildlife Sanctuary, another gem in the city of Taunton that many, many people use, like Massasoit. And so there's a good opportunity there to have an off-road trail to connect from this trail to the Boyd and Wildlife Sanctuary. And then the last one I have listed here is the Mill River Park and Riverwalk extension. So this park was actually the last time the Gateway Cities Parks program funded a project in Taunton about 10 years ago. And so it's a very less known park behind our city hall, actually, that runs along the Mill River. And so one of our goals is to extend the Riverwalk behind our main street so that it helps improve the safety of the alleyways behind our main street in City Hall, as well as connect a lot of the significant sections of our downtown. Next slide. And that is my contact information. And like I said, I would encourage everyone to check out our website, tauntonpathways.org, to look at those maps. And then just on the left, those lovely Taunton River Trail signs were created by SRPEDD through the Taunton River Stewardship Council. And so if you travel through Dighton and Somerset particularly, you'll probably see them. And then the bottom is just one of the walks that we have led with members of our community around the area where the trail is going to be. So just to wrap it up, I think I did my best to try to cover SRPEDD's question about building our economy, improving safety, and supporting our communities. Again, thank you to the folks at SRPEDD for hosting this and inviting me to speak. And I am happy to answer any questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you, Phil. Thank you for your presentation. It's been great to hear more about the awesome work y'all are doing in Taunton. Next, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeff Carvahlo, the chairman of the Dighton Trails Committee. Take it away, Jeff.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting us out to present on what we've been up to in little old Dighton. This will be a brief presentation, and you might hear a lot of things being echoed of what Phil just presented. Thank you, Phil. That was outstanding. Next slide, please. Okay. So a little bit of background, what we're going to be talking about. I'll also be presenting our vision statement, some things we've been up to, and got our contact information at the end if you have any questions. And throughout this briefing, you'll see a lot of photographs and just shameless plug. These are all taken locally in Dighton along the waterfront or in the parks, either at DCR Sweet Knoll State Park or down at Broadcove Nature Trail. A lot of beautiful scenery down there. So anybody on the phone call who's never come up this way or down this way, I recommend coming down and checking it out. There's a lot of really nice scenery along the waterfront. So you'll see a lot of pictures throughout this presentation from that. So next slide, please. Okay, next again. All right, so just gonna read off our vision statement. Our goal here is to align Dighton with the surrounding communities. As Phil mentioned, we see Dighton as well as part of a hub, meaning connecting to the north in Taunton and continuing on to Norton and Mansfield, as well as to the south to Somerset, Fall River, and eventually the Cape, be the South Coast Bikeway existing pathways, and also to the west in Seekonk and Rhode Island. So and all part of the Taunton River Trail overall vision, which is a 22-mile multimodal pathway connecting the entire region. So we see a big opportunity for connecting to our friends to the north, south, east, and west. So we see ourselves in this small community as being a big part of that, to be able to connect all those different regions together. Next, please. And again. All right, so how do we do this in practice? And so we want to look at, first of all, we've been spending a lot of time looking at the existing trails in town, in existing infrastructure and existing inventory of trails. So we want to build multimodal, not just a bike path, because there is a bike path plan for the town. And that's primarily through DCR, and I'll talk about that more in a couple more slides. But taking advantage of the waterfront access, we want to add more waterfront access so that people can get canoes and get kayaks in along the Taunton River, and to not only just take in the scenery, but also get in the water and to get closer to nature. And we see this as catering to two different groups, or multiple groups, I should say. Initially, our initial motivation is for recreation. But as we move along and we start to get more mature pathways and trails, and to be able to cater to not only recreational uses for these pathways, but also have the ability to use this for healthier commuting alternatives. So if somebody needs to go shopping or go to work or go visit a friend, instead of jumping in a car, jumping in a kayak or a canoe and jumping on their bike, and have a safer alternative. But anybody's had the privilege of jumping on your bike and riding down 138. It's not a pleasant experience. Not quite as hairy as maybe jumping on 195 or 95, but still not something I'd recommend along the roadway, because it's really small shoulders. And to something that Phil mentioned, we're spending a lot of time thinking about how best to approach how we connect to Taunton in the north, because an on-road option seems like the way to go, but we definitely want to keep our options open, and I'll talk about that more in a couple more slides. So next, please. And one more. So some of the local activities I'm going to talk about just real briefly. We have we've been pleasantly surprised and blessed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation is intending a rail trail project through a large section of Dighton, and that's expanding to the north and to the south of Sweets Knoll State Park. We learned that there a couple of years ago that there's plans and things have developed further along. It's a full 2-mile section, 2-mile section. I'll talk about that here shortly. And also Broadcove Nature Trail, and Jonathan Gray's on the call here, so he's very familiar with that, and as well as Phil. So next, please. All right, so first, DCR. What is it? If you look in the middle of the map there, Sweets Knoll State Park. That's right on 138 in the middle of Dighton. And what they are intending is a 2-mile rail trail section that starts at the south end in the vicinity of Alice's Last Stop. It's on Somerset Avenue. And the terminal, the north end terminates in the vicinity of Sandpiper Road. So it's a large stretch that goes right by the Sweets Knoll State Park. It goes by Bristol Aggie, by the elementary school, behind the town hall, where there's a running track behind there, and also a playground for the kids. So there's a lot of items along that 2-mile trail. The point of contact we've learned and had conversations with is Mr. Paul Janegy. He's a director of Trails and Greenways. So we've had pretty good conversation with Paul. We're trying to share information with what we're up to, and our biggest goal right now is, as we look at what the DCR is doing here, because they have been awarded the design and engineering funding, we have to circle back with them to see if they've identified a design agent, because I know that was their next step. But as they are preparing on their end, we are preparing as a town to see how best to tie in on the north end and the south end, so that when they start their construction, terminating to the south, it'll it'll just flow in, and then focusing efforts as well to the north. Next slide. So on the south end, this is a closer look of what that looks like. That's that building there to the left is houses a few different businesses. One of them is the Alice's Last Stop, which is a restaurant. So the businesses in there. That's Somerset Ave behind there, and there's a trailhead. If you hit next, this is what that looks like from the ground, and you'll notice that sign in the front there is the Taunton River Trail sign, one of the SRPEDD signs. It's right on there. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, so you see it right there, and that is that parking area is right at that trailhead that comes out on Somerset Avenue. So right now, that's just a parking area. Our highway superintendent and his department, they were doing some work on the road, and in the meantime, cleared an area and leveled that out for us. So right behind my car there is the trailhead. So the intent is, we're going to put a trailhead marking there, a kiosk, and formalize that eventually. Some of that is on Commonwealth property, so we have to work directly with Commonwealth of Massachusetts to get permissions for crossing over their property, because we also want to add a trail there as well. If you hit next, you'll see what we intend. So that push pin on the left, on that map on the bottom right, is that same trailhead. And so we're looking at a small trail leading through the woods that will eventually get you out to the waterfront. And one of the pictures earlier in the briefing was actually a panoramic view of being out there on the trail end. It's very, very pretty out there. It's nice to get out there. It's low-lying area, so we have to work with the Conservation Commission on cutting in that trail, as well as settling on any trail treatments we want to make. But we want to put that in hopefully the next year or so, be able to start that work. Next, please. So over the Broadcove Nature Trail, and that's a panoramic view of the south end there. It's really a unique area. It's located in Broadcove Marsh in Dighton. It's about a 25-acre plot, and there's two public entrances via car. One of them is to the west on right on 138. The other one is on Hart Street on the north. So we are, and if you go there right now, there are some trails that are cut in. They're not formally marked, and we want to do that eventually, and also get a trail map on our trail kiosk, which I'll show a picture of here next. But there's already observation platforms. There's 4 right now that we put in there, constructed and installed by the Conservation Commission. So the Conservation Commission has been very busy here, and the folks have spent a lot of time beautifying this area and making it what it is today. And so we want to come along and alongside all those other groups and be able to just add some finishing touches to make this a formalized trail in the town of Dighton. So if you hit next, I got a picture of, hit next again. Yeah, so we have that kiosk there on the right. That's at the west entrance. And so we're working right now to finalize a draft for a trail map for that area. And then we want to also vet that by our Conservation Commission so that we can make sure we have everything, all their inputs, and get a nice trail map up there, and also get out and mark the trails. And another thing we're doing too is putting in park benches, put little sweat equity in, and we bought some concrete forms. We're actually pouring those concrete legs. The picture on the left is a couple of our Trails Committee members testing it out. And then in the middle, that's us after we took it apart and moved it onto one of the trails. So we put one in, it's actually this past weekend. So the intent is to, that's kind of our test case. We're going to build a bunch more of those and put them around the trail in different areas. So that's intended there. And then once we get all the bugs worked out, we'll be able to do that in other parts in the other trails in town. Next, please. And next again. So, so going back to the DCR Sweet Stall. So DCR is got the design and engineering funding for their 2-mile section. And I've mentioned this before in other groups where, I look at that 2-mile section, and to me, it currently looks like an island, right? It's this trail, it's in the middle of town. There's no formal connections going north. It's effectively orphaned to the north. To the south, it comes out on an on-road section. So to the south, we want to We want to make on-road improvements to make things complete street style, to make it safe for pedestrians and safe for bikers. To the north, there's going to be a lot more work that needs to be done with either coming up with an on-road solution or something that is able to get across the 3 Mile River. There's different options. So everything's pointing towards pursuing a feasibility study. So we did put a request for funding for a feasibility study through our the name escapes me right now, so I'll leave it alone. We are working towards putting together an article for the annual town meeting this coming June. And to see if we can get funding from the town for feasibility study. Thank you. Yes, Gail, CPC funds. Thank you. So that chat is very handy. Yeah, so we did request CPC funds for this year. The group did not decided not to fund this year through that process. So we're going into the annual town meeting for an article. Depending on how that goes, we might be circling around for the CPC again next year and try to provide more information, more support for this project, because we'd like to eventually pursue either state or federal funding. We like to do our due diligence ahead of time to provide as much supporting information through a feasibility study to look at different options, both to the north and to the south. The request from the CPC that didn't get approved really was a focus on the south, but I want to encompass the entire project so that we can then carve it out and look for funding otherwise. In addition to that, the other work we're doing, like I mentioned on Broadcove, we're going to continue doing that with the trail mapping, the formalizing the trails and markings, installing more benches. We want to put another kiosk up in the Hart Street entrance, and also do the same thing up in, we're calling it the Green Trail. That's the short trail that we want to put at the south end of the DCR Sweetstone to get out to the waterfront. Again, same thing, marking that, trail kiosks, probably some benches and a little more formal dressing up at the trailhead. Next, please. All right, so this is pretty much wraps it up. I threw out just our contact information. It's our Dighton website, our contact email address, our main contact address. That's me, Jeff Carvahlo. We have a 5-member board. It's Rachel Conti, Rachel Began, Karen Alves, and Bob Baglini. That link there is a link to maps that are very similar to what Phil showed earlier. It was actually Jonathan Gray did one initially. We did some tweaks for Dighton. I want to check out what Phil and Jonathan have up on their website so we can update our info with that as well. So next slide. Yeah, I will definitely put it in the chat. And that's it. With that, I can stick around for the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you for your presentation, Jeff. And thank you again, Phil, for your presentation as well. We're now at the question and answer portion of our webinar. Again, to participate in the Q&A, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom. We'll then call on participants. Feel free to type a question or comment into the chat window if you are unable to unmute yourself, and we will address as many of those questions as we can during the Q&A as well. If you're on the phone, you can use *6 to toggle mute and *9 to raise your hand. If you have to run, please visit the Moving Forward webpage to find other ways of submitting feedback about transportation in the region, and feel free to email me with any questions you might have. We're now going to take questions from attendees raising their hands and from the chat.
Greg, if I may, the raise hand feature is under reactions if someone can't find it.
Awesome. All right.
I saw Eldrick Abreu raised his hand.
Yes.
Yes.
How's
Hello,
it going,
hi.
Rick?
Hi, how are you, Greg?
Good,
Nice to meet you. And I'm introduce myself. I'm Eldrick Abreu. I'm a 25-year-old New Bedford resident. Also getting involved with this group. Been a member of the Coalition of Social Justice in New Bedford. And I just had a few questions that as a resident, I've grown up my whole life, and some concerns I was wanting to bring up, and also to a higher view. I've been talking about it with certain people, but I also wanted to make a concern. And one of my main concerns was that ever since like the remodeling on Route 18 in New Bedford, I've been seeing a lot of up in excess amount of accidents there, and I know that could also be due to late night driving and everything, but there's this one pottery around the curve that between Union and Middle that has been hit multiple amount of times, but also has taken 4 people's lives in that same spot since it's been remodeled, I believe 4 to 5 years ago. And I just was trying to suggest that maybe instead of the pottery, the concrete pottery in the middle, which is actually not more now, ever since the beginning of the meeting, I've seen it's kind of looks more designed as a buffered bicycle lane instead of like a sufficient driving precaution for a highway. And maybe guardrails or that solid like guard rock would be a better institute or replacement for it. So at least when people are hitting it and hitting the accident, it could, one, also be protecting them going to the other side of the highway, but also like when you hit something much harder, it can to distribute the force evenly, and the car won't be swerving. Maybe it would help just keep the person there and have a higher life risk, chance of living through the accident.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that feedback, Eldrick. I took notes on everything you said, and we'll definitely look into that and see what we can do as an agency to help.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I was like, yes, I've been I'd love to keep getting involved with this too. This is information I really found important, and also touched me as well, because I actually as agreed in the beginning with the bicycle, all the things you were saying about the bicycle improvements, and I am someone who too would like advocate for bicycle transportation, because I had my license put on hold, but due to the fact my freshman year in college playing football, I began getting seizures and developed epilepsy, and haven't since been able to have a 6-month period seizure-free moment, which changed my life. But I've been getting more into bicycle lanes as well. And I believe that one person actually I put on my Facebook trying to get more people in the community involved with this, giving me their opinions or on anything else they'd like or something else. And someone I did know did mention about maybe like if we could get the street sweepers around more for bicyclers and help clean up the community in Bedford, maybe that motivate more people as well to be riding a bike.
Absolutely. Thank you again for all that input, Eldrick. And please feel free to email me with any of these points and to stay in touch. Hopefully we can get you in touch with other like-minded community members that want to keep advocating for this kind of work. And be sure to check out the map and the survey. I want to get your opinion recorded on some issues in transportation in the region. So please make sure you get over to that website if you can, and give us some more feedback. We'd appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very
again.
much. I'd appreciate that.
You're welcome, and thank you. All right. Next up, I think we've got Christopher Keys.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chris.
Yes. Do you hear me okay, Greg?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, my name's Chris Keys. I'm from Norton, Massachusetts. Recently retired with a lot of time on my hands. I'm an avid bicyclist, and I bike all over Southeastern Massachusetts and Rhode Island, just about every day, weather permitting, of course. And it really enjoyed in the last few months being involved with different activities with the town of Norton. I just got involved with the South Coast Bikeway Alliance, And I appreciate obviously SRPEDD's involvement in all the great things they're doing to help move forward bicycling and pedestrian opportunities in Southeastern Mass. My comment today relates to the bicycle boom over the last year as a result of the pandemic. It's really created a pressing need for more rapid adoption of bike routes as part of the transportation system pretty much everywhere. And in addition to that, there's the disruption that's taking place with electric assist bicycles, which are estimated to potentially 4% of the population in the world will have electric assist bikes by the end of 2023. That was the Deloitte Touche estimate. And so I guess there's the bicycle boom and the disruption of bicycling as a transportation mechanism. Then there's also the financial constraints that the municipalities have to go ahead and to put into place class 2 bikeways, bike paths. I guess was mentioned earlier, it being $17,000 a mile. The good news is that class 3 bike routes can cost as much as $4,300 per mile or even less. And I certainly understand, Greg, the points that you were making about the fact that it may not necessarily increase safety of bicyclists out on the road, but it does give them recognition, does give them legitimacy. It does give them potential evidence if they do get in a collision with a motor vehicle that there's some fault on the part of the motor vehicle for that accident. That, you know, when people are seriously injured on a bike, that certainly weighs heavily in terms of their future. So I guess my challenge would be to SRPEDD is to combine the vision that you have, which is great, it's fantastic, but with a pragmatism as you make recommendations to the communities, to allow the communities to be able to consider class 3 bike routes as part of this plan. Whereas right now, everything's really focused on class 1 and class 2. I'd ask for a pragmatic approach, almost in a sense of kind of pop-up bike routes that have taken place in a lot of cities during the pandemic. That's one comment I have. The second comment I have is I would ask that SRPEDD considers in this iteration of your master plan to include the Mansfield-Norton Rail Trail as a regional trail. The reason I say that is hearing all the wonderful things that Phillip is generating in the town of Taunton, and the ability to connect Mansfield, Norton, and Taunton together would actually qualify that trail as being a regional trail under your definition at SRPEDD. So that would be the other thing that I would ask as part of this consideration, because certainly I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make that rail trail become a reality for Mansfield and Norton. And I'm trying to get, immediately I'm going to jump to see if I can get Phillip to walk his area of the trail in Taunton to see what we can do to work together to try to tie that in together so that I can ride my bicycle safely from the Norton Mansfield line all the way down to Somerset and get down to the South Coast Bikeway. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was all wonderful feedback, and I've taken notes on everything you said. And
I just want to add quickly,
yeah, please, Jackie. Absolutely.
If I can, we do list Mansfield Norton as a regional trail on its own. We would love to connect it to the Taunton River Trail. It's been a long time goal. And I also like to say that I really appreciate your comment on pragmatism, because that is involved in a lot of what we do. What really drives what we include on our plans are the community level plans. So we don't like to dictate plans to communities. We like them to tell us what they need and what they want, but we do try to provide them with a variety of options. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Now, I just want to be mindful of the time. We are at the 3:30 mark. And so if there are questions directly for our guest presenters, Jeff and Phil, that we could make sure we get in first so we could be sensitive to their time. SRPEDD staff can be made available to stay a little bit longer if need be, for sure. Diana, I think that your hand was raised next. Is your question for either Phil or Jeff, or is it for SRPEDD?
No, it was more a comment, a question about the thing that Eldrick brought up, but I can,
Okay,
there's a question, they can go first.
absolutely. Thank you very much for your patience on that. Sarah, same question for you. I see your hand raised as well. Do you have a question for either Phil or Jeff?
Yeah, I have a question for Phillip. In particular, I'm wondering who has jurisdiction in Taunton over maintenance and decision-making for the trail, especially the linear park section that is already completed. You know, is it the Trails Committee? Is it the Friends, the city departments, the city council? What form do you take?
So right now, the Ware Village Riverfront Park is designated as a park. So it falls under the maintenance of the Parks and Rec Department, which has its own commission overseeing it. So our committee is under the Office of the Mayor, which is a side note. But when the trail is built, it will be deeded from or most of it is actually owned by the TMLP. So it will be conveyed using an easement to the city. And so it will have to be maintained by the city with Parks and Rec. And so what we're envisioning is that Parks and Rec and our nonprofit 501c3 will have an MOU to look at what responsibilities each one takes. So obviously, you know, a nonprofit can't do major maintenance, but we can do, you know, regular maintenance, picking up trash, you know, leaving that trash somewhere for the Parks and Rec Department to pick up. And then they would do larger things like trimming branches and stuff like that.
Thanks.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for that question. Thank you, Phil. And just so, again, everyone knows, SRPEDD staff is going to stay on a little bit longer, but any general questions that you might have, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll take another question or two, and then I think we'll be ready to sign off and sign out for the day. Diana, you're up.
Thank you. And thank you for these great presentations. I came in late, but I appreciate everything. I really like what Christopher was saying about the importance of making commutable communities as well, which is why I wanted to circle back to Eldrick's position about the problem with that intersection, and also the maintenance of that is for that intersection especially is used between people who are coming from the ports, whether fishermen or visitors to New Bedford, to get to the small businesses downtown, the cruise ships. And we know that they don't understand the dangerousness of Route 18 and crossing a major major street like that. It's not really a street, but so I just wanted to bring up to the importance of that rail, just to make sure that we have that our guests to the region are safe, and something like a more permanent barrier would be both safer for drivers, but also to really let people know that they're crossing a fairly major highway, and to be very sensitive to that. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your input. We appreciate it so much, Diana. Do we have any following questions?
Greg, I can address some of the questions that were in the chat.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Particularly
we have
relevant.
time for a couple, yeah.
Yes, there's some chatter in the chat about the DCR portion versus the rest along the railroad bed. And so Jeff pointed out that it's owned by Aquaria and some other private owners. One of the points that I wanted to stress based on Jeff's presentation is that partnership with our elected officials is critical. Senator Pacheco has been a longtime supporter of the Taunton River Trail. Most of it is in his district. He represents Taunton and Dighton, as well as our state reps. And so last year, Senator Pacheco got an earmark for the construction of the DCR portion for over $3 million in the transportation bond bill. So the work that DCR is doing right now is design and engineering, but when that is completed, there will be $3 million that can be bonded when it's ready to go to construction. Where's the other one? There was the question about designation for the East Coast Greenway. I don't know who that was specifically for, but that was something that we had looked at previously a few years ago. And I think the East Coast Greenway is meant to go around us. So it kind of goes through the Boston area and then connects directly to Rhode Island on the Blackstone Valley bike path, and then the East Bay. So I don't think it's necessarily part of it, or I don't know if we could get their designation, but that's my comment on that. And then I think the last one that I'll try to address is Arnold's question about the federal infrastructure funding that's in process right now in Congress and how that will affect these types of projects. So last week, Congressman Auchincloss had a deadline to collect requests for earmark funding. And so we did submit an earmark request for the Taunton River Trail to try to leverage federal money as well to get more pieces of it complete. So try to use state and federal money to do more. We are very thankful that SRPEDD submitted that as one of their top priorities when they met with Congressman Auchincloss. But I think the fact that Congress is bringing back earmarks is a very good sign because, you know, even in their transportation bills, they've certainly started to look at active transportation more and not just roads and highways. So that change in attitude combined with earmarks, which they now call community project funding, I think puts bike and pedestrian infrastructure in a very good place for the time being.
Awesome. Thank you for responding to those questions, Phil. And I think that makes it a wrap. Thank you again for our to our co-presenters for joining up with me on this, and thank you all for attending and listening in. Don't forget to check out the website and participate in the map and the survey. We need your input. Help us make a stronger, more bikeable and walkable SRPEDD region. That being said, I wish the rest, all of you, a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, SRPEDD. Thank you, everybody.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Absolutely.
Eldrick. Could you send me information on the chat, please?
Absolutely. I'll post that right now.
Thank you. I was like, thank you. Appreciate the time as well. I just one last thing said. I was like, one of the main reasons too as well I wanted to bring it up was a few of the people that I've died were people I was close to, and I was like, I know if a lot of younger drivers will be caught late night driving or driving doing something intoxicated or something like that, but in the past 4 years for 4 people to have died at the same pottery, I believe it's more than just a coincidence.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I would just say is Eldrick's part of the Healthy Neighborhood Study in that part of New Bedford, that section. So he is representing his community to make it safer. So thank you, Eldrick.
Yeah, thank you very much for your participation. It's appreciated. And
Thank
valuable,
you.
very valuable. Thank you. All right, everyone. Take care now.